Committee's Restoration Subcommittee. Just a quick reminder that this meeting is being recorded, so just keep that in mind and let us speak to Beck or myself if there's an issue with that after the meeting. All right, so first off, just need to provide a few housekeeping items. So in the event of an emergency that requires evacuation of the building, everyone is asked to remain calm and take all your belongings and proceed to the nearest exit of the building. The safety relocation point, if there is an evacuation, is 1615 9th Street, which is Franklin D. Roosevelt Park. So you can look for the building staff with the second floor sign, and everyone is encouraged to assemble at the relocation point with the other building employees. So that's the emergency information. Less urgent, but probably more likely to be needed is the restroom information. So the restrooms are out across the way over there, and there is a code which is 13579 pound, and that is on the whiteboards here and also on a little sign right in front of the restrooms. Last, if you need to access the Wi-Fi, the network is CNRA guest, and the password is August 2023 with the month in all lowercase. So August 2023 with August all in lowercase. All right, just a little bit more housekeeping here about how members of the public will be able to provide and have an opportunity to address the DPIC Restoration Subcommittee on any agenda item during today's meeting. So if members of the public are interested in providing public comment or asking a question on any of the agenda items, please just raise your hand during the question and answer period for that agenda item, or when the meeting facilitator, myself or Dylan, asks for public comment on that given agenda item. Then you will be called on by the meeting facilitator and you will be asked to provide your comment. If you're participating via Zoom's online platform, please use the raise hand feature, which is available when you click the reactions button in the Zoom webinar control bar. This is going to indicate that you would like to provide a comment. Then you will be called on by the meeting facilitator, and then you will be able to unmute and provide your verbal comment or question. And then when you're done, please just click lower hand. If you're participating via Zoom, but on your telephone, you need to hit *9 to raise your hand, and then you hit *9 again to lower your hand. So for all the folks that are in here in person, we're really glad to see you. So you can just raise your hand if you'd like to provide a comment during the question or answer or public comment portion of the agenda item, and you'll be called on by the facilitator. And then we have a microphone that's going to be passed around for you to provide your public comment. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions and provide public comment during each of the agenda items. And then we have a last agenda item that is for general public comment on matters that are not on the agenda, but are within the subject matter jurisdiction of this subcommittee. Public comments may be limited to 3 minutes per person per agenda item. So if help is needed to make a public comment, or if you encounter any technical issues, or as an alternative way to provide your public comment, you can email engage@deltacouncil.ca.gov or call or text 916-275-8429. So that is all the very formal information that, of course, we need to follow to comply with the Bagley-Keene Act, but we do want to just remind everyone that the spirit of this Restoration Subcommittee is to be collaborative and to have everyone that is here in person and on Zoom able to participate, to as great an extent as you would like to. So we really encourage folks to speak up and ask questions and provide comments. So with that in mind, we are going to jump into some introductions so we can all sort of know each other a little bit better. But in the interest of time, we're going to ask that only the Restoration Subcommittee members introduce themselves and provide your name and your agency or group affiliation. I do want to acknowledge that there are lots of Delta Stewardship Council staff that are here today supporting this meeting, and there are several attendees in person and on Zoom. So thank you all very much for taking time to be here today. So we'll start by introducing myself. My name is Rachel Wigginton. I'm a senior environmental scientist at the Delta Conservancy. I really wanted to say Delta Stewardship. I had just said it. I apologize. With the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta Conservancy. Sorry, I can't hold. And then we'll just go around the table here. Next, I'll pass it off to Dylan.
we plan to keep it informal. So yeah, I'm Dylan Chappell, and I'm with the Delta Stewardship Council. And for our committee members up here too, there's just a little mic off and on. The volume is at a good spot. So we'll just go in order, and you can turn it off when you're done.
All right. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I'm Brooke White. I work for the Bureau of Reclamation at the Bay Delta office. Happy to be here.
Hi everyone, I'm Amanda Cranford. I work for the National Marine Fisheries Service Central Valley office in Sacramento, and I serve as our lead for collaborative science and adaptive management.
Hello, I'm Charlotte Biggs. I'm with the California Department of Water Resources.
Good afternoon, Campbell Ingram, Executive Officer of the Delta Conservancy.
Good afternoon, Jamie Silva, Senior Environmental Scientist with the Central Valley Flood Protection Board.
Hello, I'm Amanda Bold, Delta Stewardship Council.
All right, thanks so much, subcommittee members. I also want to provide a brief moment if any of you all have announcements that you'd like to share that are relevant to the subcommittee. Please feel free to turn on your mics and provide those announcements as well.
Just a quick one that's relevant to the group. I just wanted to let folks know that we currently have 2 funding opportunities open that were passed through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So there are 2 fish passage funding opportunities. They're open on grants.gov, and they're currently open through October 16th, I believe. So a competitive process, primarily focused on fish passage projects, coastal resiliency, and there's also a funding opportunity that's focused specifically for tribes. So just wanted to keep it brief, but let folks know who are interested in restoration projects, and certainly the Delta would be relevant in this instance, given the listed salmon and steelhead present, that these are really great opportunities to look into if you're interested. So keep it brief, but if anybody has any questions, happy to answer.
Timing, do you know when they're due?
So open currently as we speak. The proposals are due October 16th. So got a good chunk of time, but as those funding opportunities are, they do have a timeline that folks will have to act pretty quickly to get in for this round.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I'd now like to ask if there are any public comment on this agenda item. All right, hearing none in person or online, we will move on to our next agenda item. I will briefly give an overview of the purpose and structure of the Restoration Subcommittee. So quickly, our purpose here is to identify and implement strategies for reducing barriers for landscape scale restoration and increase estuary-wide coordination. So that's a big purpose of why we're bringing everybody together today. Next slide, please. And this subcommittee consists of key DPIC agency representatives, those folks that introduced themselves just a moment ago. And we have set up the subcommittee so that we are able to form task forces to address certain activities. For example, we have a restoration forum planning team that's been meeting for about a year now. And we really want to provide a regular forum that welcomes all stakeholders to participate in restoration coordination. So again, reminder, this is, we really want folks to participate and ask questions. All right, and then what we're going to be talking about today at our meeting, we are going to be hearing from the State Water Resource Control Board about their statewide restoration general order. We're hearing from the Department of Water Resources with an update about their restoration work. And then we'll be hearing about a group that's been working to develop a Delta restoration funding needs for the future. Then we'll hear some closing remarks and next steps before having that general public comment period that we discussed before. All right, and now I think I need to ask if there's any public comment on this agenda item. I did practice this earlier. All right, hearing none. We'll move on to agenda item 2. So we will first be hearing from Jessica Nadolski, who is a senior environmental scientist in the Division of Water Quality at the State Water Resources Control Board. Jessica is going to be presenting us today about the background and planned implementation of the State Water Control Board's statewide restoration general order. So Jessica, if you want to share your screen, we're excited to hear your presentation.
I'm not a robot, so hopefully that's good. I'm going to turn off my video and share. This and here. Put back in presentation mode. All right, can you hear me and can you see the cover slide?
Yeah, we hear you and we can see it looks good.
Such great. All right, I'm going to go ahead and dive on in then. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jessica Nadolski. I work at the Watersheds and Wetlands section at State Water Board. My unit was responsible for developing the statewide restoration general order, referred to as SRGO or simply the order. My contact information is available on our 401 Water Quality Certification and Wetlands Program homepage, and I've also got it at the end of the presentation if you want. This presentation is intended to provide an overview of the SRGO and Program Environmental Impact Report, referred to as the PEIR. I'm going to proceed through the slides without pausing anywhere in between to answer questions, but there should be time for questions following the presentation, following the procedures that were discussed at the intro here. So as you look at the agenda, I wanted to provide a bit of context as to how so in October 2020, as many of you know, Governor Newsom issued the Nature-Based Solutions Executive Order, which advocates biodiversity conservation as an administration priority and elevates the role of nature in the fight against climate change. As part of the executive order, California committed to the goal of conserving 30% of our lands and coastal waters by 2030, known as the 30-30 Initiative. One of the 30-30 goals is to accelerate processes. A specific action under that processes goal was to expand the development and use of programmatic environmental review associated with permitting. So development of the SRGO and associated PEIR was highlighted as an example of an action to accomplish the 30x30 process goal. So what does the SRGO do? Well, simply, the order provides Clean Water Act Section 4 certification with discharge requirements for eligible project types. So project types that are eligible are listed here. Each of these are defined in the order, and I have examples for each of them too. So bear with the wordy slide, but I'm going to roll through these. Improvements to stream crossings and fish passage. These are for upstream and downstream movement by fish and other species and to improve functions of streams. These include projects such as stream crossing, culverts and bridges, fish screens, fishways, an example of riffle pool complexes, and head cut stabilization. Then we have removal of small dams, tide gates, floodgates, and legacy structures. These are to improve fish and wildlife migration, tidal and freshwater circulation and flow, and water quality. These include things such as removal of small dams, and the quote unquote small there, we define the same as the NIMS biological opinion. Also removal of tide gates and floodgates are included, and removal of legacy structures, such as grade control structures and defunct boulder weirs. Next, we have a bioengineered bank stabilization. These are to reduce input of fine sediment, enhance aquatic and riparian habitat, and improve water quality. These projects are intended to improve riparian and stream habitat by increasing stream shade to lower stream temperatures, enhance production of invertebrates, better future recruitment of large woody material, and improve bank stability. Riparian habitat restoration projects could be included in this category. Then we have restoration and enhancement of off-channel and side-channel habitat. These are to provide aquatic and riparian habitat for fish and wildlife, to restore the hydrologic, hydraulic, and biochemical functions and processes of streams. These projects typically improve hydrologic connections between main channels and their floodplains. They involve reconnecting and creating off-channel floodplain and other habitats, and potentially removing off-channel fill and plugs. New side channels and alcoves may also be constructed in geomorphic settings that accommodate such features. Water conservation projects. These are intended to reduce low flow stream diversions through installation of features such as off-stream storage tanks and ponds and necessary off-channel infrastructure. These include off-stream storage tanks and ponds and associated off-channel infrastructure that reduce low stream diversions and enhance stream flows, particularly base floods for fish and wildlife habitat during the dry season. And we have floodplain restoration. These are, of course, to improve ecosystem function by creating hydrologic connections between streams and floodplains through such measures as breaching and removal of levees, breaching and removal of berm and dike setbacks, and hydraulic reconnection and revegetation. So these projects improve the diversity and complexity of aquatic meadow, riparian habitat, as well as raw ecosystem function. Removal and remediation of pilings and other in-water structures. These improve water quality and aquatic habitat for fish and wildlife. So this category considers untreated and chemically treated wood, pilings, piers, vessels, boat docks, and derelict fishing gear, any similar structures built using plastic, concrete, and other materials that may be removed to improve water quality and habitat for fish and wildlife. The removal of non-native invasive species and revegetation with native plants. These are intended to improve watershed functions such as aquatic and riparian habitat for fish and wildlife, again, including removal of non-native terrestrial and aquatic invasive species and revegetation with native plants. We have establishment, restoration, and enhancement of tidal, subtidal, and freshwater wetlands to create and improve wetland ecological functions. So, for example, living shorelines or similar sea level levees and vernal pool restoration would be included here.
I just wanted to let you know, you're breaking up a little bit, so I don't know if
my
you're
bad.
using
Let me try and
external
move
microphone or something like that.
Sure, yeah, no problem. Try and move the mic a little bit closer and see if this works.
Thank you.
Okay. Please break in and let me know if this isn't any better. So then last but not least here, we have establishment, restoration, and enhancement of habitat and upslope watershed sites. These are to create or restore the functions of streams and riparian areas, including upslope watershed sites that could contribute sediment to streams or disrupt floodplain and riparian functions. These projects consider stream and riparian habitats, for example, complexity, their corridors, their connectivity. They typically occur in areas where channel structure is lacking because of past stream cleaning, such as removal of large woody material, timber harvest, historic grazing and meadow dewatering practices, hydromodification or urbanization, and in areas where natural gravel supplies are low as a result of human-caused disruptions. So these projects occur in stream channels and adjacent floodplains to increase channel stability, rearing habitat, pool formation, deposition of spawning gravel, channel complexity, hiding cover, low velocity areas, and floodplain function. The upslope watershed areas may also be restored through streams, promote natural hydrologic processes, and restore habitats for birds, amphibians, fish, and other species. This project type can also include road and trail related restoration, including decommissioning, upgrading, and stormproofing. All right, so inclusion requirements. So to enroll under the SRGO, eligible projects must meet the definition of a that is, a restoration project is defined as one that would result in a net increase in aquatic or riparian resource area functions and or services through implementation of the eligible project types that we already discussed, relevant general protection measures or GPMs, and consideration of design guidelines. So the big thing to highlight here is that net increase in aquatic or riparian resource area functions and services piece. If the approving water that doesn't increase, your project likely will fall under the SRGO. Yeah.
Apologies to break in again. You're still breaking up a little bit, so we're going to have Viet Long on our end share your screen, and that should increase your bandwidth a little bit, and hopefully you'll come through a little bit clearer on our end. Thanks, folks, for sticking with us through difficulties.
I am going to stop sharing then. Give me one moment, and I'll.
Great, thank you.
Go back there. I can always try phoning in too if it's really that bad. Apologies.
No, you're okay. It's not awful. It's just a
Okay.
little garbled occasionally. So I think this will get us solved. Okay. If you're able to see the screen, you can just ask me it long to advance the slides, and that should work.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, no problem. Thank you for that. All right. So we're back in business here. So the key piece here for whether a project eligible underneath the order or not is, again, approving water board needs to agree that there is indeed a net increase in the aquatic or riparian resource area functions and or services here. If there is no net increase, then by lack of meeting this definition, your project would not fall within the eligibility for the order. Go ahead and next slide. Has it changed on your end? Because it's still showing the old one on mine.
A little issues here.
Is that good?
Yeah, next slide from what I'm seeing though, this still is the old one. It should be the
Hey, Jessica, would you mind to call in? You're still breaking up a little bit.
Okay, give me 1 minute here, then get the phone number.
Thank you very much. Inclusion requirements.
Okay. All right. Apologies everyone for technical difficulties. Bearing with me here. Let me get back to back to my notes here. All good. All right. So inclusions. Again, you need to meet the definition of a restoration project that is in the SRGO in order to be eligible. And the key piece for that here is the net increase in aquatic or riparian resource area functions and or services. So an approving water board, when looking at your application to see whether you indeed are eligible for SRGO, that's one of the primary things they're going to be looking for is there indeed a net increase in those functions and services. So I'm just going to say next slide, and hopefully you all will advance and then just keep going. Interrupt me if there's some glitch on your end because I can't see your screen at this point. So next slide is inclusion requirements. Next slide is considerations when designing projects. So in addition to proposing an eligible project type, which we already rolled through, project proponents wishing to enroll under the SRGO need to consider and implement applicable general protection measures and design guidelines. Both are provided in the order for reference. Also provided for consideration by project proponents are species protection measures provided in PEIR Appendix F, including aquatic species measures that apply to water board jurisdictions, such as for vernal pool invertebrates. And there's mitigation measures, of course, found throughout the entire PEIR to reduce project impacts. Appendix J offers the mitigation monitoring and reporting program, which provides a comprehensive list of all the measures in the PEIR for review. Applicants should provide a list of the measures applicable to their individual projects with their NOI submittal to the approving water board, and then water boards may then propose additional conditions if warranted by the proposed project. Next slide, please. So that's everything to be included. So then we get to exclusions. So projects excluded from the enrollment under the SRGO come into three categories. So first, if they don't meet the restoration definition in the order, so there's no net increase, you're not using an eligible project type, et cetera, then of course you'd be outside of SRGO. Second, if your project is prohibited per section 13F of the order, which includes prohibitions for an exceedance of any applicable water quality standards or water quality objectives, or impairment of designated existing or potential beneficial uses for receiving waters. Also prohibited is an action that would result in adverse destabilization of the channel or bed of receiving waters. Lastly, in this section, substances in concentrations toxic to human, plant, animal, or aquatic life that produce detrimental physiological responses are also prohibited. And then third or last, exclusions include things listed in section 13G3 of the order, and this section prohibits specific project elements such as use of undersized riprap, creation or potential creation of a barrier to anadromous fish passage, and installation of infiltration galleries. Please review this section for the complete list when designing a project. If a proposed project is indeed excluded from enrollment under the SRGO, water boards will require the project proponent to apply for an individual certification or certification under another order. Next slide, please. So we've got our enrollment process. So for enrollment procedures, please reference the preamble to the Notice of Intent or NOI that is the application for enrolling under the SRGO. As stated there, applicants are directed to, prior to authorization, reading the order to determine if their project might be eligible for coverage. We did try to include a lot of project types, so hopefully most projects can fit in there somewhere, but do have an idea of where your project fits when you come to the water board. Determine the CEQA lead agency. Please note that water boards can be the CEQA lead agency, but it is not automatic that water boards is the lead agency. So any normal CEQA lead agency can fulfill that role if you're applying under SRGO. Then there's consultation, tribal consultation, consideration of that. If the lead agency determines an additional CEQA document is necessary beyond the PEIR, please note that compliance with AB 52 and the Governor's Executive Order B1011 that pertains to coordination with tribes would then need to be completed as well. And submit the mandatory request for a pre-filing meeting a minimum of 30 days prior to submittal of the NOI. That is typical for all of our water quality certifications and also a mandatory part of being enrolled under this order. So a minimum 30 days out, you can ask for a pre-filing meeting at any time up to that 30 days. Then submit a complete NOI and application fee. Note the order directs applicants to copy the state water board with any NOI submittals, including those submitted just to our regions. And water boards then have a standard 30 days to determine completeness of the NOI. A 21-day public notice period will also occur roughly within this time frame or shortly thereafter. Water board authorization will ultimately be through a notice of applicability or NOA for enrolling under SRGO. So after authorization, project proponents are directed to submit a commencement of construction notice at least 7 days prior to ground disturbance. Status notifications and reporting will need to be submitted to the approving water board along with monitoring reports to be completed in accordance with conditions in the NOA specific to your project. And finally, project proponents will need to submit a request for notice of project complete letter for final project closeout when everything is complete. Next slide, please. So CEQA. CEQA, of course, refers to the California Environmental Quality Act. The State Water Board developed a program-level environmental impact report for the SRGO. The PEIR evaluates environmental effects of implementing restoration projects of various sizes and locations throughout California. The PEIR may be used to satisfy CEQA requirements if the lead agency determines that the proposed project would not result in new effects or impacts and/or require no new mitigation measures beyond those already provided. Next slide, please. So common questions I've been asked since the SRGO was adopted. First one here, I have a landscape level project with individual actions that cross regional board boundaries. Who is approving, or who is the approving water board? So the SRGO was implemented like any other water board permit in terms of jurisdiction, meaning that if your project crosses regional board boundaries, then state water board will process the permit application or the NOI. For landscape level projects that include individual actions on both sides of a regional board boundary, the approving water board, so state water board or the regional boards, will be determined in consultation with the project proponent on an individual basis, with consideration of items such as the official project description in a NEPA CEQA document, are there any project phases proposed, and the location of the actual work. To have those conversations, please contact either the state water board or your local regional board to discuss the project when that scenario arises. The second here, I've been asked about grants. So you're applying for a grant, trying to get funding. How can SRGO help? So SRGO does not have a direct connection to any grant application process. SRGO provides water quality certification and waste discharge requirements for applicable projects. The associated PEIR, however, can, when deemed appropriate by a CEQA lead agency, be used to satisfy CEQA requirements. Therefore, it's possible that grant funds typically allocated to complete CEQA requirements for restoration projects can now be used for other purposes. And that leads me to number 3. What options do I have for satisfying CEQA and enrolling under the SRGO? So again, the order itself is a permitting mechanism for water quality certification and waste discharge requirements. The order does not mandate a particular process for satisfying CEQA. An applicant can utilize a separate project-specific document for CEQA, can use the PEIR, or can tier from the PEIR based on the lead agency determination. The applicant can also obtain a SERP authorization from CDFW, which leads me to the next slide. The next slide, please, and that should be the great California Department of Fish and Wildlife logo. So Water Boards is working closely with CDFW, of course, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and restoration project proponents to help determine the most appropriate pathway for satisfying CEQA. CDFW currently offers a CEQA statutory exemption for restoration projects. So again, CEQA statutory exemption for restoration projects, or SERP. The SERP does have eligibility and documentation requirements, which can be found at their program webpage. So then the last slide really is a list of resources. These are all things I mentioned through the presentation, including my email address, the State Water Board 401 program webpage, a direct link to all the SRGO documents, including all the order, the attachments, the application, the PEIR, and appendices, et cetera, as well as the CDFW link to the SERP homepage. So this concludes the presentation. Thank you for inviting me to speak, and I'm happy to take any questions if there's still time. And again, apologies for any technical difficulties there.
Yeah, thank you so much for persisting through those. Really interesting presentation. We definitely have time for some questions. So as we spoke about before, in-person participants and virtual participants can both raise their real hands or their Zoom hands. And then we will call on folks and you'll be able to ask your questions verbally. We're going to start with any subcommittee members that might have questions, then move to folks in the room before checking in on our Zoom participants to see if there are any questions. Yeah, go ahead, Campbell.
Hi, Jessica. Campbell with the Delta Conservancy. I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about the uptake and the use of the general order and how many you've processed and what sort of time savings you're seeing as a result of using the general order.
Yeah, sure. To date, well, we've got lots of interest and lots of folks asking about it, of course. To date, we've permitted about 20 projects so far statewide, and we've got 5 or 6 that are in process with officially submitted applications right now. So getting a lot of use and seeing a lot of use for complicated projects, or what it's intended for, larger scale projects over, many acres. I've got a meadow restoration project that just permitted that I think was overall upwards of 1,000 acres, or in the thousands of acres, with little individual sites, meadow sites along the way, that were getting beaver dam analogs and things like that in it. So some really interesting fish passage projects, things like that. As far as time saving in the second half of your question, what we're hearing right now is really related to CEQA and how much the CEQA process itself it can be a time saver as well as a monetary saver, with the PEIR available for use. The order itself has been on the street. I can't believe it's been a year now, but I think it's a year to the day today. It was adopted August 16th last year. So we're, just really getting our feet under us. We're talking about potentially sending out a survey to applicants to get more, real data, if you will, about time savings and that sort of thing. And I also need to report back to my board about how things are going and total number of projects in around the February-ish time frame. So I'll have more definitive figures and a better answer to your question overall at that time. But to date, that's where we're at.
Thank you. Any other questions from subcommittee members?
Just adding to Campbell's question, have any of those examples been in the Delta so far?
I know there's been conversations in the Delta, but I personally can't point to a particular project. I'd have to reach out to my Central Valley region. And I know in speaking with them, particularly Lynn Coster, if any of you know her at our Central Valley Region Board, Region 5, she was very interested that one of us come and give this presentation to y'all because of the great projects and work that come out that she says they permit within the region. So I'm sure she might have an example, but apologies, at State Board, I don't have one right now that I could point to.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from subcommittee members or folks that are in the room with us today? All right, seeing none in the room, do we have any on Zoom? All right, Elijah, you should be able to unmute yourself now and provide your question.
Yeah. Thank you, and hopefully you all can hear me okay. Thank you for the presentation. That was really helpful. I'm a senior environmental scientist with the Voluntary Agreement Restoration Program in Region 3. I was just curious if this permitting tool has been used in the context of required mitigation projects or even for the establishment of mitigation banks. Thanks.
You broke up a little bit for me, but I believe it's about mitigation and mitigation banks and whether you can use SRGO for that. The answer really is it's up to the approving water board, and it comes back to that definition of a restoration project. Recognize that if you're setting up a bank, for example, bank setup and bank credits are already used to offset an impact typically. So if you've got an impact, you're using, acres of a bank to offset an impact, there is no net increase there. So you have to be careful. However, if there is going to be a net increase, so maybe some lands are going to be preserved or there's going to be, restoration that is not necessarily offered for credit, or, those are things you need to consider and talk to the approving water board about. If we can get to a place where there's a net increase in those functions or services, then it could, a particular project could be eligible. But that's the key piece when thinking about mitigation projects and whether they would fit under RGO or not, is really that, getting to that net increase.
Excellent, thank you. Any other? Yeah, we have another question online.
Kristen Colbert.
Okay, Kristen, I'm glad you could join us. Go ahead and ask your question, please.
Thank you, and thank you for the wonderful presentation. Kristen Colbert, American Rivers. I'm a project manager and I've had really great success with SERP, so I'm really interested in learning more and possibly pursuing the SRGO for several of my projects. My question is that I am deciding between using SERP and SRGO slash the PEIR that you'd mentioned during the presentation for a project. Would you advise that I first approach the water board to see if my project would be a good fit? Or if I should approach CDFW and let you coordinate? How would you advise I proceed?
If there's a question particularly of whether the SRGO is in play, meaning whether your particular project is eligible or not, I would definitely reach out to your approving water board and get that answer resolved up front. And you know, then you can proceed from there. If you're pretty sure, or you've already had conversations that, yeah, you know, the order itself for waste discharge requirements and water quality cert, that will work, and the question is really towards CEQA, then frankly, you can reach out to either parties. DFW, you know, has that, if you haven't seen already on their website, they have an email set up and they respond to you pretty quickly. And we have, and of course you can reach out to anybody at our approving water board too. All of us have emailed online, or you can come directly to me. And what we've been doing between our two agencies is we both have contacts at the other agencies that are specifically working on restoration projects. So whomever you reach out to, and it's totally up to you, it shouldn't matter. I would just request that, hey, can we have a CEQA meeting between the two agencies, a coordinated meeting, because you're just not sure what CEQA pathway is most appropriate for your project. And that's what we've been doing, is we've just been coordinating and having multi-agency, sometimes they're kickoff meetings, sometimes they're just CEQA specific meetings, but you know, having a quick, well, I say quick, sometimes they go 2 hours just because there's a lot to talk about depending on the project, but you know, 1 to 2 hour Zoom, WebEx, would, you know, whatever fits, with both agencies on the line. And if you're, depending on where you're at in the process, you know, water boards can give you an overview of the PEIR. DFW can give you an overview of SERP. We can talk about pluses or minuses for both. And then, you know, you can decide what works best for you from there for sure. But I think the best way, again, we reach out to any agency first, doesn't matter. And the key piece there is to request that you have the multi-agency CEQA meeting, and we've been doing that pretty much as standard since the SRGO came out. So I think that'd probably be the most helpful to you and help you decide what pathway for CEQA is the best.
Perfect, thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Thank you so
no
much.
problem. I was going to say, and if you have any problem setting that up, please don't hesitate to email me or drop me a quick email, because we've been doing that multiple times. I frankly at State Board have been sitting in on some of the region calls with that, just because, you know, when SRGO and the PER came out, they came out of my shop, so I had the most background knowledge. So I've been sitting in to help out as well too, and can definitely help out facilitating a meeting happening between the two agencies. Like I said, it's become pretty standard for us at this point.
Great, thanks for that information. Any final public comment on this agenda item? Right. Seeing none in the room and none online. Thanks so much for your time, Jessica. We really appreciate it. And I'm going to pass it off to Dylan.
Great, thank you, Rachel. And I did just want to note that there was just a chat from Pete McHugh from CDFW, who was in our presented at a previous Restoration Subcommittee meeting, just encouraging folks to reach out for a joint consultation with CDFW for issues on this topic. So just wanted to read that out for the folks in the room who can't necessarily see the Zoom chat. And with that, next up, we are going to hear from Charlotte Biggs, who's the Assistant Manager, the Division of Multi-Benefit Initiatives, and Steve Rothert, who is the Manager in the Division of Multi-Benefit Initiatives at the Department of Water Resources. And they are going to be sharing with us an update on recent restoration progress that the department has made in the Delta. And with that, I'll hand it over to them. Thanks.
Thanks, Dylan. Thanks, everybody in the committee. Is this working?
You tip it a little more.
Put it in my mouth. Good. So Charlotte and I will be giving you all an update on the progress that we've been making over the past months and years so on the multi-benefit projects in the Delta. And so let's see, are you? Okay, great. So if you could go to the next slide. So these are the primary drivers and guides of our work in the Delta. And you can see there are many policies and plans there that provide the impetus for this work. And when you think about, just the state of the Delta and the species, there's no shortage of reason to act with urgency. And so this is what drives us, as I'm sure it drives you all as well. Next slide, please. And of course, the Delta Plan, Chapter 4 amendments were completed, I think, last year, and they're under development of regulations, I guess, to implement it. Okay, glad I got that right. And so the most relevant parts of Chapter 4 for this work is the identification of the priority habitat areas, which we can see there in the hashed green and black areas, and the goal of creating 60 to 80,000 acres of habitat within those primary or priority habitat areas. And next slide, this shows in the yellow blotches within the green and black hashed areas the projects that we're working on right now, and demonstrate that the projects that we're doing really line up with the priorities of the Delta Stewardship Council. And we are developing these projects with best available science to deliver, I think in most cases, primarily or priority flood risk reduction, but also habitat, water quality, and recreational opportunities. And so as we progress and have success with these projects, we're also accomplishing or contributing to the accomplishment of the goals of the Delta Stewardship Council. So we're very much partners in the effort to restore habitat. So I think I'll turn it at this point to Charlotte to provide some specifics on the progress we've been making.
Thanks, Steve. I working? Okay.
And you can actually turn there's the volume knob up there. You can just turn it up just a little. Yeah,
okay.
Perfect.
Okay. Oh, next slide, please. Thank you. So I get to talk about progress. And it's really the progress, that we've made in the Delta over the last several years. And then we're also going to highlight a couple of projects in our portfolio from the different regions, just to talk through some of those details. So overall, where we are today in terms of progress, DWR has 28,000 acres of habitat restoration either underway or completed. So that's either under construction or has completed construction. When we include projects that are in planning, that brings our total to 36,000 acres. So this is a mix of different habitat types, including tidal, subtidal, floodplain restoration, and riparian. Our original Eco Restore goal, many of you know me as the Eco Restore Program Manager, which is another hat I wear. Our original goal was 30,000 acres, or at least 30,000 acres. So it's really exciting to look back and see that we, over the last 8-9 years, have made a lot of progress. At the time when Eco Restore was established, the 30,000 acre goal was very ambitious. So it's exciting to see the progress that we've made towards that goal. And I think just harking back to what Steve just mentioned in our ambitious goals that we've set for ourselves for the future, I think that's part of our message today in presenting our progress to date, is that we have made a lot of progress, but there have been a lot of challenges and considerations that go into these projects. And so we just kind of wanted to share our success, but also, not be blind to the challenges and things that we are facing going forward. So Steve and I are just going to highlight a couple of the projects in this portfolio. We can go to the next slide. So we'll start at the north of the Yolo bypass. So projects in the Yolo bypass are very challenging for us to implement. Not only is the bypass a critical flood conveyance system that helps us, divert high flows around the urban areas of Sacramento, it's also a very critical piece for habitat and fish passage. At the same time, as we implement projects in this area, we really need to balance the fact that the bypass is primarily agriculture. And there's also a lot of areas of public access and areas where people don't want public access. So kind of just a very interesting balance when we're working in the bypass. So currently, at the very northern end of the bypass, DWR, along with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, has a very massive project at the Fremont Weir. So we've been working to, we've been working with Reclamation to lead this effort to construct the Big Notch, which is the largest floodplain salmon rearing habitat restoration project in California's history. The project will modify the Fremont Weir itself. We will also be expanding the floodplain rearing habitat for juvenile salmon and improving access to the bypass for both salmon and sturgeon. So this project really aims to extend the timing of flooding in the bypass to better account for fish passage, which is really a critical step needed for recovery of these threatened and endangered species. So currently, this project is under construction. We are scheduled for it to be operational in 2024, but there were some setbacks this year in terms of weather and supply chain. So that's sort of a moving target, but it is underway. And then Steve will talk about the other projects.
Sure. So the next that we'll address is the Upper Elkhorn Basin, which is the black area on the map just to the east of the Fremont Weir and Big Notch project. And the Upper Elkhorn Basin is RD 1600. It's about 7,000 acres. And it has on the northern border of the basin, the eastern half or so of the very long Fremont Weir. And so the concept has been in Central Valley flood protection plans and other plans related to flood management, the concept to modify the weir to allow more frequent overtopping and inundation of the flood basin as part of and expanding the Yolo bypass. And so if the project is implemented, something like what has been contemplated, the flood risk reduction would be substantial, both far upstream and downstream from the Fremont Weir and Upper Elkhorn Basin. It would reduce 100-year flood levels by over a foot in a lot of places. So it's a substantial project, and there's also habitat and ecosystem function benefits that could come from it. So it's also the focus of the Army Corps of Engineers comprehensive study that will cover the whole bypass, but the first phase of it will cover the upper part of the bypass and with a special focus on the Upper Elkhorn, and that's just getting underway. And DWR recently contracted with SAFEGA to work with the RD 1600 landowners in Yolo County and other local interests to develop a locally preferred plan that would then be fed into the Corps of Engineers comprehensive study to hopefully get the most benefit for the region out of that process and the most federal funding, to be honest. And as Charlotte mentioned, this is a really complex landscape, including political, and there are some lawsuits that have been recently, or at least notice of intent to file lawsuits that have been issued recently by the Yolo County and by RD 1600 that seek an injunction to stop the work on the Fremont Weir and Big Notch project, and we'll see how that goes. Hopefully we can figure out a way to work together and go forward and address those issues and advance the projects at the same time. So that's the Upper Elkhorn. The Lower Elkhorn project is nearing completion. Major, which is the picture on the bottom there, you can see with Sacramento in the background and the one part of the levee there being constructed. The major earthworks are done. The new levee is essentially complete. And we're in the process of deconstructing the old levee, which will then open up, I think something like 900 acres of habitat or land that will now be on the wet side of the levee, so expanding the bypass by 1,200 feet or so. And several hundred of those acres will remain habitat while the rest will remain in agriculture. And I think the project will be vastly done by the end of this year with some sort of punch list issues to be completed next year. So we're excited to see the conclusion of that really important project.
Yes, I'm gonna go to the next slide. So still in the bypass, just moving a bit more south, in the Cashley region, this is Lookout Slough. Lookout Slough is owned by the department. It's the Delta's largest tidal habitat restoration project to date. It's over 3,000 acres, but it is a multi-benefit project. It's also a flood improvement project where we are setting back the Yolo Bypass West levee, so a state plan flood control levee. The site's in Solano County. It's just south of Dixon, and it's been under construction since last June when we broke ground on the site. So I wanted to give you guys some updates because I'm sure many of you have heard about this project, but wanted to kind of update you on where we are today. So the new levee is constructed. So the new setback levee is done. Since we started construction, we've been working with the reclamation district in the area to increase their assessments. And so that work is also complete. The reclamation district will be taking on the long-term maintenance of that levee. And so there were some concerns about funding, so we've addressed that. We've also worked with the reclamation district to update their flood emergency response plan. We've protected 150 acres of giant garter snake habitat that's just adjacent to the project. That's under a permanent easement. We completed that just a couple months ago. And then the pictures that you see here are of Vogel, which is a standalone parcel, part of the project. It's 60 acres, and we were able to restore it to tidal action last October. So it's been kind of nice because it gives us a sense of how the rest of the site will function. And so we were able to do that ahead of the rest of the site, which we plan to breach next year. So we're prepping the breach sites along the Shad Slough right now. There's 9 of them. So it's taken a half last year to prep, half this year to prep, and then we'll actually breach next year. I think that's it for Lookout Slough. We can go to the next slide. So I wanted to highlight quickly Prospect Island, still in the bypass. It's just adjacent to the Deepwater Ship Channel and Liberty Island Ecological Reserve. It is a 1,500 acre site that's owned by the department. And this effort, most people are familiar with it. It's been in planning for a long time. So I'm excited to share that we have obtained all of our necessary permits and approvals to move this project forward. And we plan to start construction next year. So we're actually working with the local reclamation district to finalize the design and put it out to bid for construction. So that's pretty exciting after, I think it's been about 15 to 20 years, maybe more. So very exciting. We can go to the next slide. See.
Great. So the Little Egbert tract is at the very bottom of the Yolo bypass, adjacent to Rio Vista. You can see there. And this is a project that is just really getting underway in the planning process. It's a 3,000 acre set of parcels that would be a multi-benefit project, would provide additional public safety, flood risk reduction for Rio Vista and surrounding agricultural areas, and 3,000 acres or so of various types of habitat within the tract. We completed sequescoping, I believe, in July, and we're beginning a series of meetings with local interests in September on themes of flood risk reduction, agriculture, recreation, and maybe water quality, and maybe another theme or two to get more public input as we formulate alternatives to study in the CEQA process, which will lead to a draft EIR, hopefully by about this time, if not earlier next year, and a completed CEQA process by the end of 2024. And then would go on to final design and permits and construction in 25 or maybe early 26. So that's
that's that project.
Hopefully you're not getting dizzy. Let's keep going. Okay. So now moving out of the bypass into the Western Delta, this is Dutch Slough. So Dutch Slough is also owned by the department. It's in Contra Costa County in Oakley, the city of Oakley. The full site is 1,187 acres. We completed the first phase in 2021, which was 700 acres of habitat and a 3-mile levee improvement. The second phase, which would be an additional 487 acres of tidal wetland restoration and another 3 miles of levee improvements, is something that we're working to fund and plan today. So that's underway. So this is a multi-benefit site as well. One of the exciting opportunities at this site is that it includes a public park that we're planning in coordination with the city of Oakley and regional parks. So there'll be a trail going around the whole wetland area, and we've incorporated that into the design, including some small bridges over the breaches. So this site has really been celebrated as a living laboratory. The project was designed to test different tidal elevation ranges. The project we've also just made a huge investment on this site in terms of monitoring, both monitoring aquatic and terrestrial species, as well as carbon sequestration. At the DPIC, so the DPIC actually came out for a site visit at the site earlier this year. So DWR, we love hosting site visits out at Dutch Slough, and we're excited to have some more completed projects soon that we can start bringing groups out to as well. Oh, and actually, before we leave West Delta, I just wanted to mention, because I don't normally highlight Chips Island. It's a smaller project, tidal wetland restoration project, that's all the way kind of at the edge of the West Delta there in yellow. So Chips is about, let's see, 700 acres, and it's planned for tidal wetland restoration. It's another site that's owned by the department. And it's just exciting news because they have obtained their final permits, and they will be submitting for the Delta Plan consistency shortly, and then hopefully would go to construction next year. So just kind of a heads up on that one. And we can go to the last. So this is our last 2 projects we wanted to highlight, and then we can take any questions or discussion. So this is over in the Consumnes River Preserve area. This is McCormick Williamson Tract and Grizzly Slough. So both of those sites are within the Consumnes River Preserve. Both are owned by the department. And these are 2 examples of sites where we have restricted height levees. So especially on McCormick Williamson Tract, it flooded in 2017, and then it also flooded this winter. And some people might be aware that I included a photo a colleague of mine took from his flight from LA, I think. So we were able to at least get a photo of it currently flooded today. And then the top photo is of Grizzly Slough back in, I think it was January. So I just wanted to mention, this kind of illustrates another point, which is more of a cautionary tale. So some of the sites that DWR prioritizes are often those that are subsided, have deferred maintenance on levee, have deficient levees, basically sites that the state hasn't made big investments in recently, because that would kind of it wouldn't be a very well organized plan if we were doing it that way. But part of the problem is that as it takes us longer to plan, permit, and construct these sites, they just become more vulnerable to this type of risk of natural flooding events and things like that. So McCormick has been victim of that now twice. So we just kind of wanted to share where we're at with McCormick. So we considered basically 3 options on the site after the flooding this year. The first was just to keep it flooded as is. The second would be to pump out and drain the site and move forward with the site as it was designed for construction. And then the third is sort of the middle of the road option, where we would preserve the breaches that occurred this year, construct inlet and outlet channels to provide the full flood benefits that we were looking for, as well as the habitat benefits. So at this point, DWR, we are pursuing the middle of the road option. So we're hoping to keep it flooded, work with regulatory agencies on CEQA and permitting that will be required to do that. The good news is it could save the state some funds that would be put to other restoration projects and other uses in the area. The other good news I just wanted to share is that we've been coordinating with East Bay Mud, and they've done a multi-year telemetry study in the area. And we're looking at use of this site just since it was breached this winter, and their preliminary results. So it's still preliminary and subject to change, but it has been used by San Juan. So it's kind of exciting, and we're definitely keeping that, in mind as we make decisions about the site moving forward. So I think.
Yeah, I think that's
Wanna
it.
Wrap it up.
Yeah, thanks, and happy to have any conversation about or question about the projects and anything else. Thank you.
Great, thanks, and we'll do the same order before. We'll start with subcommittee members, open it to the room, and then go to our participants. So, Jamie.
Thanks, Steve and Charlotte, for the update. It was really great. I'm just curious with reassessments for restoration lands and maintenance responsibilities for reclamation districts such as Lookout Slough. I was hoping that you can touch on, how that process went and, any lessons learned and timelines.
Sure, and I should mention that, Jamie, I think you have some background of memories of working with us on that effort a little bit. So yeah, I think, as I mentioned, as we prioritize sites for restoration, they often are levees that have deferred maintenance or have deficient levees. And so that usually goes hand in hand with an underfunded reclamation district, if there is a reclamation district. So, it's really case by case. Every project's going to be completely different. And that's just the way it is. But for Lookout Slough, as DWR became the landowner, so as the state purchased property within the reclamation district, we just made the commitment to pay more in assessments, basically to cover the maintenance costs that would be necessary. And so that lessened the burden on the private landowners behind the levee. They still had new benefits from the new levee, and so their assessments went up, but we just made sure that that raise was like in line with the market and what other reclamation districts pay. So trying to basically minimize that increases on the private landowners as we make these land use changes. Hopefully that helps answer the question.
I think he also was wondering maybe about timeline for.
Timeline, yeah, so that does go through the process, the 218 process, and it needs to be voted on by all landowners in the area to approve it. And so for Lookout Slough, we just took an early outreach approach. So we talked with all the landowners ahead of time. Many times and had many meetings with them before we actually went through the formal 218 process. I think overall it took probably about a year. An engineering firm needs to do the study, and they assess the benefits to every landowner, and that's how the assessments are then created. So it's possible, and it's definitely, as we look at these projects, it's one element of that we plan ahead and try and tackle as we're planning the project.
Yeah, thanks. It's great overview. Really appreciate it. Actually had the chance to kayak through the breach on McCormick Williamson about a month ago. So
Cool.
kayak through the island was quite fun. My question is, you've exceeded the eco restore objective. What is the expectation for DWR moving forward in terms of restoration, funding restoration, and continuing that work?
It's a good question, Campbell, and I think there will remain several drivers of restoration funding and projects within the department for foreseeable future. And I think one, and perhaps the most solid or reliable, will be the multi-benefit approach that our division is tasked with taking in developing projects. And what we have found is that, and as many of you probably know, that there is quite a lot of funding for a nature-based approach or multi-benefit approaches as opposed to the single interest type of project. So I think the multi-benefit approach will sustain this kind of work for quite a long time. But in addition to that, I think the interest in the voluntary agreements and making some early advances toward the restoration goals that the parties, the state and federal and private parties have entered into under the voluntary agreements will also continue to be the driver of restoration funding. And in fact, the funding that we do have, or some of the funding we have, can be applied just to restoration, and in those cases can support the voluntary agreement goals. In addition, the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, as you know, has a conservation strategy that's part of the plan, which has measurable objectives that are meant to quantify essentially the contribution that the flood system needs to make in the restoration of the environmental functions and habitat that the flood system has impacted over the years. So the conservation strategy will be an ongoing program with measurable objectives against which we are comparing our progress. And you might recall from the 2022 update, we didn't have that many acres, to be honest, on the boards, if you will, towards those measurable objectives. But I'm sure by 2027 we'll have thousands of acres of restored habitat that we can count towards those measurable objectives.
Great. So if there's any other questions from the committee or in the room, you can raise your hand if you're in the room. Okay, seeing none. Do we have any questions? Raised hands on Zoom for this item. Great, then I will ask one quick question. I'm curious about results, early results from the Vogel parcel that you were talking about at Lookout. I'm curious what vegetation establishment has looked like there over the last year, and what what you're thinking it might be telling you about the larger site.
Yeah. I might follow up with you with more details, but I know just in general, the two leaves just popped right up. We didn't plant anything. And that's kind of all I know. After going out there, I don't think I've been out there since we breached. But we will be, I know that our team on the ground there are definitely paying a lot of attention and going to be applying this lessons learned to the bigger project. And we just in terms of like access and how we did the breaches and things like that, there are definitely some lessons learned, I guess, from the construction as well.
Great, good to hear. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We will just give one more opportunity for public comment for our Bagley team requirements. Okay, I'm getting the thumbs up on the virtual and thumbs up on the in-person. So thank you very much, Charlotte and Steve. And Steve's going to stay there, I think.
Come around.
Okay.
All right,
Great.
good to you.
Great. So for our last presentation today, we will hear again from Steve Ruther from the Department of Water Resources and from Campbell Ingram from the Delta Conservancy, who will share an update on recent work to assess the funding needs for accomplishing future restoration goals in the system.
Great. Well, good afternoon again. It's great to be here to share this effort with you all. The origin of this was thinking back in late April, early May about bond discussions moving forward, and how prepared are we in the Delta to really be able to articulate how much funding do we need and for what in those processes. So we thought that it would be a good idea to bring the agencies together, the folks that are actively working in the Delta, and start to sort of sort through that. We do have an objective, goal 4, objective 3, or 1, 2, and 3, objective 3, actions 1 and 2, within the Restoration Subcommittee work plan that really talks about the need for us to collectively try to identify costs and advocate for funds for restoration moving forward in the Delta. So this fits nicely within that as well. So essentially what we did is we just pulled together agencies. You can see the agencies listed there. We had folks from CNRA, DWR, CDFW, Stewardship Council, Delta Protection Commission, Suisun Marsh RCD, and ourselves, and essentially just said, okay, what's out there? Let's think about the next 10 years. What projects do we have that are coming up? What things are sort of in the hopper? and what do we think they cost. And so it was very productive. We met about 4 times over the course of June or late May and June. And definitely want to thank everybody who participated in the process. So if you go to the next slide, please. I kind of want to talk more to the if you go to one more slide. So this is essentially the output, and I'll just kind of walk through the organization of it. But first, obviously, we just have the project name, a brief description of the project in the second column there. And then the third column, I think, is really important. It was an attempt to link every action to the regional and statewide strategies that we now have. You'll see things there. You see 30 by 30 nature-based solutions, chapter 4, centralized flood protection plans, even the 2022 scoping plan. But these are all now strategies that we have that clearly articulate objectives and measurable and can measure our progress towards meeting those objectives. I think that's really critical when you're advocating for funding, and it's a great tool. Next column, of course, is the estimated cost, and I will say that these are estimates. They're fairly coarse. And then last column there is the lead agency, or who did we think should actually be the agency for receiving and then distributing these funds moving forward. So we broke it down here. We started with projects first, and then we had programs, and then we had Delta flood protection. And they're sort of listed to some extent in a prioritization, sort of a more rough prioritization, with projects that are a little more developed and more ready to go, and then more conceptual projects towards the bottom. So with that, we'll just hit a few highlights. Steve and his group provided information on all the projects that are upcoming for the Yola bypass. You can see them listed there and an estimate. Elkhorn Slough is a project that we provided funding to do the planning to reconnect Elkhorn Slough, and you can see a total cost there to implement as that moves forward. Most of you probably know that there's been a large planning effort on Frank's Tract to really identify how to reduce salinity intrusion, create habitat, and maintain recreational opportunities. So we're looking at trying to take that project forward in the next 10 years. We had Sickle Island in the Suisun Marsh recently has been inundated, quite a bit of opportunity there and some discussions. South Delta bypass has been talked about for a very long time, a way to make the South Delta bypass function like the Yola bypass. South Delta dredging is another project that's been coming up recently. Potential to restore Big Break. And then also the last one I really like is the opportunity to potentially really look at the whole Cosumnes corridor all the way down through Williamson Tract and the town of Locke, and look at establishing potentially a state park boundary, providing more access. There you can see the governor's access for all objective listed in the regional and statewide objectives. Next slide, please. So then for programs, just for general ecosystem restoration in support of Chapter 4, we put $175 million. Delta carbon subsidence and carbon management work that we've been leading. Recently, we put in another $100 million. Worked with Suisun Marsh RCD and talked about all the opportunity there. Put that at about $20 million. Delta as place. This is, we received funding under Prop 68 for encouraging recreation and tourism opportunities in the Delta and more public access. We want to include that here. The Stewardship Council helped quantify the need for Delta Adapts. That's the new Delta Adaptation for Climate Change strategy that's going to be coming out. We have the Natural Heritage Area that has been established now, and we'll need some initial funding over the next 10 years to help support that effort. And next slide, please. And then we try to quantify the next 10 years funding need for flood management and levee work in the Delta. So all total, this came out to $2.4 billion. We tried not to say, we tried to be reasonable in our assessment. We also recognize that, bond discussions are obviously often, of course, they're big blocks of money that don't get into this level of detail. But again, we thought it was really important to be able to sort of look at the amount that we need and be able to make sure that those folks that are having those bond discussions have that type of information moving forward. And maybe I'll pause here for any questions folks have on what we did or okay, Steve, and then I'll go. So how did we share this? The first thing we did is we sent it in an email with an introduction to Secretary Crowfoot and all of his staff. They were very appreciative. They responded that they thought the information was important and they appreciated us doing it. And then we made a presentation at our board meeting on July 25th. And in my executive officer's report, I really was just highlighting that this meeting was coming up, and I described a little bit about reporting on this process. Generated quite a bit of interest, and that was the first that we had shared with our board, and it resulted in our board asking for us to share it with them. So we did that, and what you have to recognize about our board is we have 5 county supervisors. We also have ex officio members in the Senate and the Assembly. So our ex officio member, Senator Dodd, and his staff picked up on it. They subsequently forwarded it to Kip Lipper, who's with the Pro Tem's office, and then Senator Stern, who's one of the co-authors on the current version of the bond. So it was really interesting how it sort of took step and went a little further and really got to the places where ultimately we'd like to see it get. They were, again, very appreciative for the effort, but also mentioned that the current effort within the bond discussion really is how do we trim back the bond to make it more reasonable. But again, I think it's really important that I think this is really probably the first time that we've all collectively gotten together to say, here's what we need and why we need it. And I think it's a really important process. So that really gets me to the last point, and I haven't given Steve much of a chance to chime in here, but we thought that this was really an excellent exercise, just in general coordination. First time we've all gotten together and thought about the big picture in a 10-year funding process. All the agencies that participated just felt it was really beneficial just to do that together. And so we want to be able to do that more frequently, probably try to do it semi-annually or annually. And then try to always maybe time that with the budget cycle a little better, and then always look for opportunities to be pushing this information to where it can have an effect for our funding needs. One last point, the chair of our board, Supervisor Mitch Mashburn, asked, well, did any locals participate in this process? Do we have local interest, local governments and or the community participate? And we know there's agencies here that didn't participate as well. I will say that, our attempt was to do this very quickly because bond discussions were coming up. We definitely had people around the table that I think really understand the breadth of everything that's happening in the Delta, but it's a point well taken. Absolutely. In our future efforts, we need to include folks from the counties and locals to make sure that we're getting all that perspective, and that will just make the process more robust. So that's essentially what we wanted to present. And again, happy to answer any questions or field any complaints about not asking for enough money.
Well, I just want to say that Campbell really deserves all the credit for this effort. I think it was on that tour that we were taking of the Paradise Cut restoration opportunities associated with that project, and he said, "Oh, I think it'd be a good idea if we got together and came up with a list and a integrated package of projects." And it was a great idea, and I think we should continue it as we go forward, even after a bond conversation, just so we're better integrated and knowledgeable about what our respective interests are. So thank you for doing it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kim and Steve. Much appreciated. So we can start again. If anyone on the committee has questions first, then the room, then Jim. Great. Seeing none from the committee. Any questions in the room? Doug, go ahead. And actually, let's bring a mic. So just to make sure that folks listening online can hear the question. I know it's a little funny, but
This works, yeah. So it'll be quick. I did notice it looked like there was an RCD. It's one of the fix an RCD. So Suisun Marsh. The RCD, yeah, and so I just want to say I appreciate that you did include, looks like a local agency, obviously not a lot of local agencies, but I was happy to see that an RCD was part of that process. So.
Yeah, that was a good natural fit, given that they're so actively engaged in the whole system effort.
Yeah. I know the yellow RCD would probably be interested as well in the future, but yeah, appreciate that.
Yeah, and the San Joaquin RCD, San Joaquin County RCD was part of the recommendation for the dredging item.
Oh,
Remember? So there, yeah. So it wasn't,
so we sort of captured their interest without them.
yeah. Yes. Yeah. John Herrick was there that day. Yeah.
Hello. I noticed the Frank's Track project mentioned for Windy, and I'm out of curiosity, wondering if that is a mitigation project for the Delta tunnels project?
No. Essentially, the idea was several years back, the Department of Fish and Wildlife initiated a really extensive planning process to just look at, I'm trying to think of a 3 mile slough across the northern, but look at how salinity moves through the system, and then look at Frank's Track as an opportunity for habitat restoration. So they came up with an initial sort of high level concept plan. And there was a lot of pushback from local communities about loss of access to Frank's Track for hunting and fishing. So they did a much more broad year-long planning process that was really focused on those 3 objectives, trying to reduce the amount of salinity that just naturally comes through Frank's Track. It's almost like a strange little pump that pumps salinity into the system, as well as create habitat and maintain recreational opportunities. So now the plan is to go back and look at that in a little more detail, refine cost estimates, and see if we can scale back the cost a little bit to something that's more achievable.
I can just add one general note, just for context. For Delta conveyance or the tunnel mitigation, it wouldn't be on a bond. So none of this would be mitigation, just to clarify.
Right, any other hands in the room? Great, anything online? Well, I really appreciate this effort. I think, as you know, Charlotte mentioned the chapter 4 updates, and Campbell, you mentioned them as well. I do think that this is just a really critical piece of figuring out the roadmap to how we actually get to the numbers of ecosystem acreage that we know we need in the system. So really appreciate you all sharing and putting this effort together.
Thank you.
And I'll give one last opportunity for public comments. Great, so that concludes our main agenda items for today. Thanks so much to those of you who have joined us in person and online. We will look ahead to our next Restoration Subcommittee meeting, likely in early 2024. And as always, if anyone does have any ideas for agenda items, we're all ears. If you recall some of the items that we covered at our last meeting, we do have still all of the prioritization of our work plan that subcommittee members have weighed in on. And so in absence of hearing any specifics, we'll just continue to work through that work plan in the way that it's been prioritized by the group. So we really thank you for the time that you put into letting us know what your priorities are and what you'd like to see. We also, we are, I think, fast closing in on a date for the second Restoration Forum, which Rachel mentioned at the top of the day today. And so this is really an opportunity to bring together both people working directly on restoration, as well as members of the public interested in restoration, to hear, and for our second forum, we're really going to focus, based on feedback that we heard from our first forum, on providing a place for newer developing projects, as well as some established projects where there's been some documented outcomes, them getting together in an open house format to share information about their projects, And our current plan, again, based on feedback we received from the first one, is that this will be held mostly after hours to really increase the ability for members of the public to attend this. We'll also be in the Delta, and I think we should have an answer pretty soon on a location. So we have a few we're thinking of that we're pretty excited about. So more information on that soon. And I do want to thank Doug Brown and Ivan Seanock here, who serve on our planning committee for that restoration forum effort. So thanks for coming today, and thanks for all your input on that process. And I think that's it for our closing. Amanda, if you want to.
Yeah, if I could just put a plug in for the next full Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee meeting, which is scheduled for November 7th. Generally, DPIC, the full body meets roughly twice a year, and we focus on specific agenda items. Our last meeting was in April, focused on restoration, where we had a really great tour of Dutch Slough. For this next meeting, we're actually going to be moving closer to the Bay, and we'll be meeting at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Bay model, and focusing on modeling and Delta adapts to climate change. So obviously a lot of strong connections to restoration. More information will be coming out on that soon, but obviously everyone is also welcome to that. And it should be interesting to have a tour of the Bay model and just kind of hear how modeling has evolved in the Delta over the years and the role, very important role it still plays. Anyway, more to come on that. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. If there is any public comment on any of those closing items or public comment on any items that weren't on the agenda, and just as a reminder that Rachel let us know at the beginning, but comments during this period should be limited to matters that are not on the agenda but are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Restoration Subcommittee. There, so if there's anyone online or in the room, raise your real or virtual hand. Eddie, we'll bring the mic over to you.
Hi, thank you. Eddie Hard with State Parks. I just wanted to observe that throughout the presentations today, which were excellent about restoration, I want to emphasize the nexus to the success of those projects are really integral when it comes to in-delta tidal restoration and invasive aquatic species, in particular plant management. And the absence of that in any of the discussion today was striking. And I think the success of those projects is going to really hinge on what investment, bonds or otherwise, those particular species are tagged along with those restoration efforts. Because that's exactly what we're finding right now in the BWR restoration sites. And I expect it's more than just restoration. So in the Delta, as we all know, we have water conveyance, ag production, ports, recreational boating. And one of the key components is invasive species management, particular invasive aquatic plants. And there's a real challenge with that in terms of water conveyance, food and fire production, and restoration. So it's something that this group, Parks, is not part of the DPIC, but our parks are referenced this afternoon. What was it? I guess in Locke, there's one, right? And then Frank's Track. So we'd be really enjoy to be part of that conversation. But also, I really want to emphasize the invasive species component for a lasting impact to make all these projects successful. So thank you.
It's a really good point, Eddie. I appreciate you making that.
I just want to piggyback off that because I'm really glad you mentioned invasive species. I'm a student currently, and I'm looking to go into the management of specifically water hyacinths in the Delta. And I'm really here just to observe and very curious about the meeting that you mentioned next up and hoping to get more opportunities and ideas of how I could step into that. And yeah, that's it.
I just want to add one last thing related to the Restoration Forum. I really see that as an opportunity for this group, for the DPIC, to kind of make the connection to the locals. I think there's a lot of opportunity in the Delta. There's a lot of very creative people, landowners, farmers, students, all kinds of folks who have good ideas about how to do restoration in a way that works for locals. And so I see real value there with the Restoration Forum, but I would just encourage you to continue to think about that, how to keep making those connections, keep identifying those ideas. I just really see it getting more difficult going forward because a lot of the easier restoration projects, and Charlotte will probably laugh when I say easier, but the large scale restoration projects, we're going to start running out of space. So I think we have to continue to be creative in identifying restoration opportunities. And if this group and others, agencies can identify ways to do that through locals where it makes sense for those locals, provides benefits and raises all boats, as we like to say, I see real value there. So.
Well, since I really like those comments, and especially those about invasive management in the Delta. And I think we kind of breezed past it, but we had land stewardship as one of our guiding principles as we implement these projects. And DWR has formally stood up a land stewardship program within our department where we're partnered with state parks and boating and waterways. But that could be a good topic for the Restoration Subcommittee at some point. So I just thought I'd throw that out there, maybe not. But yeah, we could always talk more about that and talk about strategies, because it is definitely a major challenge that we are facing. So thank you.
Yeah, we know it's not going away. And, it's something we're all going to be focused on for the foreseeable future, for sure. So that's a great idea for. I think one of the strategies in our work plan specifically, or one of the items is around long-term maintenance and figuring out coordination around long-term maintenance. So it'd be great to work together to put together an agenda item for that for a future meeting. Absolutely. Great, and I'm not seeing that there's any online comments. So I think with that, we can thank you all, and really appreciate you joining us today. And enjoy the rest of your afternoon.